you know nothing about technology, but you can use something like ChatGPT to structure, an interview that will give you an idea, at least a much better idea than if you were just to go in there with your gut feel. They said they have advanced SQL skills, but they can't join two tables together. And kind of as a hiring manager, it just can be really frustrating. As humans, we're quite good at reading people in terms of, are they genuine? Are they curious? Are they competitive?
Dan, welcome to the Objective Hiring Show. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Tim. Thanks. And happy to be here.
Dan, I'd love to start by getting your thoughts on the current state of the hiring market for data roles, because I've spoken to a lot of people recently who feel like it's broken in many different ways. Do you think it's broken? If so, how is it broken? What for you are the leading problems and challenges at the moment?
Thank you. Well, I think in general, I would say data labor markets and hiring market is a very dynamic kind of environment, first of all. So there's lots of roles. These roles are changing quite fast. There's a lot of new roles. Some roles maybe are kind of fading away. So it is a very dynamic place. And I think as a participant in that environment, I feel kind of privileged to be there. I think compared to many other professions, actually, like maybe finance, more traditional professions, I would say the kind of data job market is one of the exciting places to be in. Having said that, having myself had to kind of look for roles maybe several times throughout my career in the UK and outside of the UK as well, it can be painful to actually go through the process as a candidate. And likewise, having been on the other side as a hiring manager, it was also quite painful actually to hire. So, despite being a dynamic and a great market compared with other traditional markets, still there is a lot of things that can be improved, both on candidate and hiring manager side.
And I'm interested in then just drilling down in a few areas. So your experience as a candidate, I'd love to hear in almost a sense of the good and the bad and the ugly. And did this vary by the market you're in? Has it changed since you've gone up the ranks? Has it gotten, for example, a bit easier as you've been more senior? I'd love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a candidate, so I guess definitely it gets much easier as you go, as you build up your CV. But I think it's not kind of a linear upwards sort of trajectory. Actually, then goes down after some points in your career. So when you're just starting off, kind of you don't have any brand names on your CV, it is difficult to get shortlisted to the first interview. Or even if you happen to have the first interview, if the company name you work for isn't as recognizable, you will be prioritized if there is a similar candidate with a more recognizable brand name on their CV. So that definitely helps having experience in a company that people know. And then, but that kind of applies to the hands-on roles. I would say once you're kind of an associate level, sort of an analyst level, and the senior analyst level, there having that experience and having some brand names helps, and it makes the process faster. But then once you reach a point of sort of head of analytics, actually, it kind of doesn't matter, how much experience you have. It's just there isn't that many roles out there usually, and just the market. The market is smaller, so kind of your experience is quite different. And I imagine when you get to kind of chief data officer level, there it's there is even fewer roles there. So kind of the hiring cycles last even longer than that. So I would say kind of changes, there are ups and downs, but definitely I think what helps is having, kind of something on your CV signaling that you've been tested and vetted by rigorous processes. and people having that stamp helps a lot. So for me personally, I think having that experience at Uber, so I worked at Uber as a analytics manager, that really opened many doors for me. So getting into Uber was not that easy. I got there from consulting. But then once I had that badge on my CV that I worked for Uber and later on, it really generated a lot of demand for me as a candidate. And it was much easier to then interview. But having said that, it kind of depends on who you interview with. So if you're interviewing with large companies like Meta, for example, or Google, regardless of kind of what your CV says, they will take you through the same process typically. And that process is quite standard, quite rigorous, quite hands-on. So they expect you to do kind of coding live in front of the interviewer, whether it's SQL, Python, and then problem solve, etc. So kind of there, like your background helps you get through the door, but then the process is quite fair, quite predictable. Actually, you can prepare for it, but like you don't really have an advantage or disadvantage there once you're in. But then when it comes to small organizations, what I found is quite often, actually, like startups, for example, they wouldn't even know how to interview you as a candidate. So they will kind of look at your CV, look at your credentials, and then ask you some common sense questions. And typically you will speak to some executives, and quite often that's the job. So that's what I found in small tech organizations. So the level of kind of rigor in these processes is, you could say, shockingly different, depending on the company you're speaking to. But yeah, having that badge on your CV always helps to get through the first round.
You mentioned, shockingly different or staggeringly different levels of rigor in the hiring process. So one end of the spectrum, you've got this elongated, several months long heuristic process in a FANG where they kind of put you through the ringer. And then there's maybe the other end of the spectrum where it's a startup, a good conversation with a founder or someone like that to really get yourself in there. And you mentioned also in passing, sometimes the small companies don't even know what to ask you. Is that because you would be the first data hire? So they don't know what they don't know, because the person who would be interviewing you would almost be yourself, or should be yourself, but you aren't in the company yet. Is that part of their lack of ability to really interview?
I think that, definitely that's part, or can be part of, kind of the reason why. In my case, actually, there were data scientists in the team that were building this AI chatbot. When I was interviewed for the analytics role, some more kind of BI role for that startup, they just didn't bother to involve them in the interview process, although they could have tested my SQL ability, just general technical understanding. They also could have involved some developers, maybe, just to kind of sense check, like, does he understand how ETL works, or like some basic fundamentals. But that wasn't done either. So I would say it's kind of, because maybe sometimes you can be the first data hire, but also because they haven't built the muscle of hiring people in a rigorous and fair way, regardless of roles. So quite often startups, would just kind of have arbitrary processes, unfortunately, for hiring people. Now with something like ChatGPT, actually, you can standardize hiring, and you can be, the only member of your startup or your company, and you're hiring the second person. You know nothing about technology, but you can use something like ChatGPT to structure, an interview that will give you an idea, at least a much better idea than if you were just to go in there with your gut feel.
Yeah, you're right. These technologies are just have the opportunity to reshape hiring drastically, I think, very, very quickly. And I think that's a nice segue on to the other side of the market, which is broken hiring from the company's perspective. So one thing we've heard a lot of in the last few weeks has been, especially from companies in Europe, UK, United States, are complaining about being inundated with CVs. They're basically all saying that they're getting heaps of applications. The applications all look the same. Lots of them look really good. They seem to match the job description very well. And there's an uncanny similarity among them. So it seems like there's a lot of ChatGPT usage to create like the perfect CV. Is this something you've noticed yourself? And have you got any thoughts on this problem?
Actually, in terms of people using ChatGPT for CVs, I haven't encountered that yet myself. But yeah, obviously that's kind of it's a very easy win for candidates to take it through ChatGPT and to improve their resumes. What I have noticed though is that quite often what people claim on the resume doesn't match their actual abilities, unfortunately, and that's why you have to take them through this fair, rigorous process. That's why the FANG companies actually do all these steps. I think that there is a reason for that, and it works. So, kind of what I found in my experience hiring for these roles is you have to hire. I mean, you have to take these people through the basic, interview steps of testing their SQL. If that's a kind of data analyst or data scientist role, testing their Python, testing their statistical knowledge. It just has to be done, and unfortunately, you just can't trust what's written on a CV, and that is the most time-consuming and difficult process. You have to schedule these interviews with every candidate. They have to be rescheduled quite often. Sometimes they don't show up. Sometimes you can't show up. Then when people do show up, they said they have advanced SQL skills, but they can't join two tables together. And kind of as a hiring manager, it just can be really frustrating that maybe out of 20 interviews that I did in the UK for data analyst role, maybe one or two people actually kind of met the bar that was described in the job description. And then you take them to the next stage, and out of these two, maybe none of them actually meet the next bar. So that was I mean, it was a full-time job for me as a head of data to interview people, like basically for the first 6 months. And you could argue that as kind of the first data hire or kind of data analytics BI hire in the company, your time is quite valuable. But unfortunately, it has to go to these kind of into these basic checks that people actually, that people can do what they claim they can do.
Yeah, and this has always been a problem, and I wonder if it's going to get exacerbated by the fact that now candidates are partly outsourcing the writing or optimizing of that CV to ChatGPT. And so it's not like they're lying now. No, ChatGPT is hallucinated and it's exaggerated. So it's not even my problem. It's I'm just using whatever it gave me. Like I could easily see how candidates would either do that deliberately and sort of not worry about it, or even accidentally because they're so busy trying to apply to jobs, they're not going to scrutinize every little word that ChatGPT has rewritten. So I wonder if this problem is going to get even worse now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it might happen. Definitely. I think definitely, like as a human being, you sort of judge, the quality of a candidate, not just based on the content, but also the way this content is packaged. So I'm sure that ChatGPT will help, create this good packaging where, the kind of the way the experience is described, the words that are used, are quite well selected. So they flow nicely together. It's easy to read, and that will just give you the impression that, okay, this candidate seems like a good candidate. At least they have an ability to put together a concise, information-rich CV. But it turns out maybe it wasn't there. It was ChatGPT that did that, because actually being able to condense information into something concise, well-structured, and that flows is a very important skill for data roles as well. So definitely, I think it might kind of increase the percentage of candidates that pass through the first round, but then they'll still, in a company with solid hiring processes, they will still have to face actual technical tests and kind of proper interviews. Now, I was just thinking in my mind, like, how like what's a good metaphor, I guess, for hiring people, and maybe for hiring for data roles. And in my previous company, Gelato, there was this metaphor that we are like athletes, we're like a sports team, and we're all here to show. We're showing up to perform as a team. And if you're not performing today, unfortunately, you're going to get substituted because we're here to win. We're not here to hang out or to be kind of a family. We're a sports team. And when you apply that kind of mentality to hiring, it's almost like if you take soccer or football. As a left wing football player, I expect you to run 100 meters in 11 seconds. And then I want you to show me that you can actually do that, right? And maybe you could do it last year, but if you can't do it anymore, unfortunately, you can't come to the team. So these kind of standards and tests, I'm sure they exist. I think there's the medical test and the fitness test that takes place in sports hiring. In the same way, I think it should be a norm to do similar tests in data hiring and kind of general hiring as well.
Yeah, I think that's the way it has to go because, as you've mentioned already, if we rely or overly rely on just taking the candidate's word for it, that's doomed to fail. We already know that. Like, we don't need any more data to understand how crap a CV is as a determinant of who is worth speaking to. Because as you said, you have a conversion rate of like 1 in 20 or 2 in 20. That's my exact experience as well. Because candidates are going to exaggerate, they're going to lie, they're going to misrepresent things. And that's only one side of the equation. There's also the other side, which is the candidates who underinflate their achievements, maybe don't include everything on there. Then there's the whole bias angle of like, who's looking at the CV? How tired were you when you looked at it? Did you spend 5 seconds or 30? So there's like just so many reasons why I feel like that screening step based on a CV is doomed to fail, and has failed. Where are we going to go with this then? Because if all these CVs are just, not representative of reality, even if we automatically screen them with AI, for example, which would solve some of the problem, it's still a crap data set. So do we almost need like a new screening tool, like some new data to sit in between the application and the first interview? What do you reckon?
Yeah, actually, I really agree. I think with where you're leading this conversation towards. So I think if I was to take a step back, maybe some people exerted lots of effort at high school and they happen to get to a really good university. So they have, really good brand name on their CV. I mean, that deserves, respect. Well done. But it doesn't mean that the person who, in high school didn't exert as much effort, or maybe wasn't in shape or for any other reason, but then started, really focusing on, data skills later in life. And maybe they didn't graduate from university or on an unknown, less known university. It doesn't mean that they should have a lower kind of, it doesn't mean that they're less fit for the specific role you're hiring for, right? Objectively speaking, it's obvious. They actually could be a better fit. But unfortunately, kind of the way things are set up now in the hiring system is you're looking for signals that this person is hardworking and this person has high IQ, etc. And the way you do that for junior candidates is you look at the university brand name and you look at if it was, the GPA score, etc. So if there was a way to remove all of that and just do a fair and square test, right? So this is a 100-meter sprint. Whoever runs faster kind of gets to the next round. That's it. Right? I don't care if you graduated from Harvard or you never went to school. If you can do that kind of means that you're ready to you meet one criterion for this role. And I feel this kind of meritocracy is what we really lack in hiring. And I wish there was a way to install that, and hopefully in an efficient manner as well, in less laborious manner, because you can't do the same test for 200 candidates that applied for your role manually, right? That will be a much brighter future in my mind, much more kind of fair and equal, and also more meritocratic, and a win-win, better for companies and better for the candidates.
Well, yeah, it probably doesn't surprise you to learn I agree 100%. I feel like what you've laid out, though, is a vision that's quite at odds with the typical narrative we hear in talent teams, right? I don't think I've heard the word merit for about 10 years. And their reaction to testing and these kind of objective measures is almost the polar opposite. They'd immediately be thinking, oh, this is biased, this is unfair, this is going to be against this type of candidate or whatever. So it's very interesting, the reaction. Also, generally around automation and AI, just like concerns and fears that it's somehow like anti-human or something. But I personally feel like that's misguided, because if the current hiring process is so tediously manual, how humane can it be if it takes you 3 weeks to get back to a candidate, if candidates can't get any feedback, if the best candidate routinely doesn't get hired? Like there's some weird missing thing here where I feel like the solutions are actually very obvious, but the mentality is not in line with this solution at all.
Yeah, that's a whole different topic. Like the fact that most candidates never get a proper response from the employer, and they put all this effort in. And yeah, most, at least from my side, when I was interviewing, maybe 80% of companies I interviewed at never bothers to send me a proper reply. They just kind of ghost me. After 2 or 3 rounds of interviews, they would just ghost me, basically. Even big names in the UK, I won't name them, but kind of big tech names in the UK tech scene, 3 interviews, they just ghosted me. No, nothing. And that's kind of normal, for you just kind of become numb to that. You're like, okay, well, that's just how things are. And I don't think it's okay, actually. I don't think we should accept that.
We shouldn't. And again, it's what's frustrating to me is I feel like now the solutions to these problems are not that complicated at all. I mean, if you had an interview and you had there's so many AI meeting recorder tools that have been out for years that accurately transcribe what you're doing. Now, with the large language model, you could almost start to grade candidates against the questions you're asking them. If not, someone could certainly be writing notes there, and you just need to email it to the candidate. Like, it's not really that hard, but I feel like because the whole hiring process is currently so tediously manual, the people managing it have so little time to really spend on anything of value, because they're manually doing scheduling, manually reading hundreds of CVs. It's just all this tedious manual crap. If we automated away some of it with good technology, then you could actually have a more humane process. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I would love for someone to actually count all the hours that go into interview. It must be an insane number of hours that goes into interviewing, say, just for data roles on both sides, right? So maybe for every job kind of match to happen, maybe there is I'm sure there is more than 10 hours of interviews, if not, maybe 20, maybe it's 50. I'm not sure. So there's lots of duplication. People having, interviews with 20 organizations answering the same questions, right? And say for the companies, them having to interview, lots of people that don't, really, obviously they don't meet the mark. So yeah, there is such a huge amount of inefficiency. I imagine all that time was reinvested in something better than, than interviews.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where the solution will come then, some kind of intermediate product that, as you say, maybe validates and asks questions of candidates, a certain set of things that every company's interested in, like communication skills, the basic technical skills for the role. Give me an example of X, give me an example of Y. And then you could just connect and share that information with different employers who all want to know the same thing, to maybe bypass that first step or first 1 or 2 steps. Because as you say, it's so tediously repetitive that if we could automate away some of that, that's just, there's got to be some big cost or efficiency saving at the end of the day for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the value created will be huge. It'll be billions and billions of dollars worth of value.
Yes. And again, I feel like like the underlying technology to do that is there. We just need to get on with it, personally. What about bias? So we kind of just touched on it a little bit. With the current way hiring is typically done, which is like a manual CV screen. A CV has all sorts of things on it that are fundamentally irrelevant to choosing the best candidate. For example, their name, which reveals their gender and ethnicity. No one needs to know that. You could argue the hobbies. Some people feel like that's a gray area. They want to know someone's hobbies. For me, I would rather not know them because I've personally been biased against candidates because of their hobbies. And I could share some examples there. But there's a lot of stuff on a CV. It's just like, I don't want to know. This is just noise. Um, and what I'm interested then is how do you see us moving to like a fairer, more objective hiring process that you mentioned that's kind of more merit based? At the moment, it starts in such a bad on such a bad step. How can we move away from that? Do you think?
Yeah, I think we definitely can. I think in general, human beings are so adaptable and malleable. We can, we can change. I think quite easily in the long term. Now, at the same time, we are kind of stuck in our ways, right? Kind of the way hiring and CVs have been structured historically, it just kind of has this inertia. I think you're totally right. Like, why do I need to put my hobbies, and why do you need to know my name, right? Because it's not that relevant. And maybe in the same way, do you need to really know kind of my high school and kind of my entire life journey? How relevant is that to the specific role I'm going to do at your company? Maybe it has absolutely nothing to do with that, but I think the way human brain works, it likes the story narrative. So we kind of form a story in our mind about each candidate. Okay, so they started here, then they went there, then they went there. Okay, looks like it's a good progression. And you start rationalizing in your mind the story, and especially if you can relate to that story, maybe, and see yourself there a little bit. You're like, oh, I really like this one. I think this is a good fit, and that's where bias creeps in. So it just happens to be that candidate been on a similar journey. They also went maybe abroad for their bachelor's degree. Like, okay, so they must have experienced some similar experience. To me, I think that made them more resilient. You kind of start rationalizing things that you shouldn't be rationalizing. All people are different, and the specific role that you're hiring for has a objective list of criteria. You should be just looking at those, not the story, not the narrative. So yeah, I don't have kind of the full answer in terms of how to make it more objective, but I definitely kind of what my gut feel tells me at the moment the amount of bias in the process is probably shocking. I am not personally aware. So when you say like yes, when you read the names, etc., you can infer gender, ethnicity. That's right, but I don't feel I have enough self-awareness personally to notice that, okay, this name evoked this kind of bias in me, right? I actually don't know that. I'm just reading it, and then subconsciously maybe I made some conclusions, but I'm not aware of them, actually. So I feel the way to make it an objective process is, I think, only to show information that is highly relevant to kind of success criteria for the role. And I think it should be much simpler, perhaps. Actually, you don't need that much information about the person. You need to know kind of, are they capable of doing the task and kind of fulfilling the role? Are they motivated of doing that role? And be kind of, I guess, logistically, when can they start? How soon can they start? And is there anything over the next kind of 2 years of the plan that can sort of, that should be a consideration whether we should hire them or not. And kind of that's it, right? I think everything else sort of should be, should not be part of the selection criteria. And then there is this cultural fit, of course. And that's where, you could be kind of controversial and say you shouldn't do cultural fit. Like if the person is fit for the role, but they should accept it. But then in reality, they will be collocated with other human beings, and they need to be able to form some sort of a connection with them. So yeah, so I guess that you do need to have some conversation, and that's where all that information will be potentially revealed. But at least from the technical perspective, I think it can be quite a objective, sort of super precise even process. And then there is maybe the cultural, the EQ, kind of the human part of it, which maybe someone else takes care of, even not, maybe there is a trained professional that does these interviews that knows how to be a bit more objective and less biased, etc. What I found about kind of the personality and the human element of hiring is it is important to diversify the interviewers. So if the interviews are all male, you would typically you would notice a difference as soon as you introduce a female. Kind of the panel discussions become very different towards the end, and then women will pick up on things in candidates that men typically wouldn't. And I remember some women saying, I remember how this person made me feel like I was inferior or something like that, and something he felt like he was talking down to me, for example. Right. And that's not the kind of trait you want in a person in your office that is talking down to women. But then when you interview them as you man to man, you wouldn't actually pick that up. So, yeah, I mean, it's a complex thing. I think there is the objective part, which is, the capability, the motivation, which I think can be standardized and automated. And then there is the human part, which is highly subjective. And I'm not an expert to tell you how that part should be done. I'm not sure that can be automated, but I think that should be done by people that are properly trained to run these interviews.
That's an interesting thought I'd never had before. You almost might have an expert soft skills or cultural interviewer who's agnostic to the role or whatever. It's just their job is to evaluate this one thing using the most unbiased method they can as a human who's still ultimately biased. Yeah. That's interesting because, I feel like a lot of the time we're almost winging it, like we're making it up as we go along in hiring. Like you mentioned, even for the startups, getting that kind of vibe that they don't quite know how to hire yet as a company. And like I've never personally received interviewer training in my life. Like I've just learned through a lot of trial and error, emphasis on error. Okay, that I figured it out over 10 years how to do it less crap than I did it initially. But surely there's just a general set of best practices of how to do it in the right way. And the difference between having an excellent interviewer and a person who's never interviewed before in terms of the end outcome must be staggering. So yeah, imagine we might end up having professional interviewers. That's an interesting concept. I feel like even though that step is subjective, and maybe it's less subjective with an expert, I feel like you can still make it a bit more objective by at least adding some numbers. So it might be someone's opinion over, this person's communication skills or their demonstration of this particular company value. But if you just get people to measure and say, well, give them a mark on a scale of 1 to 5, at least then you've drilled it down to a number, as opposed to I didn't like them or I didn't feel like they're a good fit, which is where I see a lot of cultural fit interviews go quite poorly, is it just ends up as this general vibe feeling at the end. Whereas if you force people into numbers, it could help a lot, I think.
Yeah, I agree that standardizing the questions helps. I think definitely there should be a standardized structure of that kind of softer side interview. But then numbers, my suspicion is that, my hypothesis is that, if you don't like someone, like numbers won't help. If there is a bias, or some sort of prior experience you had in your life that you associated that person with, and you're punishing that person just because he or she evoked that memory in you, for instance, you will find a way to rationalize it. Or your subconsciousness will kind of find a way to do that. So I'm not sure kind of numbers themselves will solve it, unless you have a very very descriptive criteria for each number. Like 5 means 1, 2, 3. 4 means this, and that. Maybe that can help, but I mean, it is probably a whole science, which is I'm sure full of also unknowns and biases. I do feel, the more I think about it, I do feel people should be trained for this. And I agree there should be a structure. Also, there should be a trained professional that is aware of, biases and kind of knows, as you mentioned, right? Like if you're hungry or not hungry during an interview, your mood is so your scores are gonna vary a lot. So someone aware of all these things. And also maybe you can't ever have one person who kind of has the final say. You should have sort of a few people that can represent different perspectives.
Well, one thing I'm struck by, Dan, is all the data leaders, like analytics and data science experts I've spoken to in 5 years. I reckon only 10% of them would be of your mindset, which is, no, we need to do this objectively. A lot of the stuff is measurable. Let's set up a scorecard. Let's try to do it in a structured way. 90% of them would just go, no, I trust my gut. I trust my intuition. And they basically do the wing it approach, which I find bizarre in that these people are leading analytics functions in product and sales and marketing operations. They are getting up there and doing the in-team meetings, vouching for the power of data-driven decisions on one hand, and then they go to hire someone and they just go to the pub and have a chat with them, or a similar kind of vibe check. Do you have any hypothesis as to how those two things coexist in their minds?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I guess my mind went to kind of these stories about Steve Jobs, how he would interview people, and he would kind of almost stage like a theater play, pretend like he's not paying attention, and he would kind of do unexpected things in an interview, and kind of and they kind of carry them out in a strange format, and then somehow that gives him enough signals to conclude whether this person can operate under pressure or not. So he had, like, I think, one specific sort of, or maybe two things that he was looking for. Can they kind of operate under pressure? And I think it was something else. So that could be maybe. It's difficult to kind of to pinpoint something, one or two things that will explain all the 90% of people. I guess all of them are different; they have their own ways. But in my mind, what I personally look for, but kind of based on my gut feel, is curiosity. So I think when I see in the candidates that there is that genuine curiosity for the subjects, and they're actually, and there is track record that they actually have learned a lot about the subject in the past 6 or 12 months, and they're humble, and they're a continuous learner. That kind of could be kind of a decisive factor for me on a kind of gut feel basis. That maybe that's not something you can objectively measure. Actually, it is something that you kind of feel, perhaps during the conversation. So my guess would be that these people have, these specific traits, personality traits, they're looking for, and they just trust. And the best way to do that is just rely on your gut feel, because actually, as humans, we're quite good at reading people in terms of, are they genuine, are they curious, are they competitive, right? So, like, in terms of personality traits, so maybe they're looking for specific traits, and the best way to identify them is by trusting your gut and just kind of trusting your instincts. So that would be my hypothesis. Is they're hiring based on personality, not based on sort of capability or anything else.
Yeah, I think you're right, and they're probably pattern matching to what they're expecting. But I think the challenge with there's many challenges with their approach. One of which is, again, it's the unconscious versus conscious thing. If they just started the hiring process by listing out all the things they really wanted from a candidate, they'd probably uncover things that they were kind of secretly screening for in that pub test interview. But if they got them down on paper, then at least you can have a conversation about, okay, you're looking for someone who's, resilient and trustworthy and works hard and whatever. And they'll probably discover, hang on, one or two of these criteria are bullshit. It turns out you're really just looking for someone who's exactly like yourself, for example. And so bringing these forward in a conversation could give a level of self-reflection that would then make you think, oh, right, actually, I get it now. I'm just, picking myself again. So I feel like even if you're going to go for the gut feel approach, at least do it in a conscious way, I guess, would be my thought.
That's an interesting point. I guess, I suspect that a lot of people are looking for themselves kind of maybe five years ago or 10 years ago in the candidates. That must be such an ego-pleasing thing to do.
Wonderful. Well, Dan, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been really insightful, wide-ranging, And yeah, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with our listeners.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for everything you're doing with Alooba. And I hope, I'm really having my fingers crossed that you'll achieve the vision of making the hiring for data roles objective and pain-free.